Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us, Daniel Ostrana. Welcome to Ostrana.media. So, what you see in the headlines is only the outer layer of how things are. What truly matters, the forces, in other words, shaping the future, remain largely invisible. And that is why my friend Peter Koning and I, we have decided to begin a series of weekly conversations, not commentary, not noise, but deep structured analysis of the forces driving the world into the next phase. And so each week we'll go beyond the obvious, decoding the hidden logic behind current events, connecting geopolitics, economics, power structures, separating signal from distraction. And if you feel that the world is becoming harder to read, you're not alone. And so these conversations are designed to give you the framework to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. So join us on a weekly basis as Peter and I are going to delve into some of the more interesting events happening around us. Peter, thanks so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you very much, Daniel. As always, it's a great pleasure to be with you and to
So
talk to you.
let's start, with Trump's assassination attempt, okay, which happened, I think it was on Saturday of last week. And when I woke up the next day and I saw it, and I kind of looked at all these silly people running around, and I thought to myself, this it absolutely does not look real. And they keep saying that Donald Trump, the purveyor of democracy, and this is the fourth time that the evil Russians or Chinese or Iranians or Al Qaeda or whoever it is, that might be there, or Iranians, are trying to kill Donald Trump. What do you think about that whole thing?
No, this absolute, it's crap. I agree with you. This is, and I don't understand how the fourth time they can fool people with something like that. It's just unbelievable. And I don't think many people actually will fall for it. At least I hope that at least in the United States, people are a little bit smarter by now and see the game behind it. This is so nonsensical to have the people believe that their great president is going to be attacked by somebody. Besides, they didn't really come forward with the real suspicion. They let you guess who it could be. Maybe the bad Iranians, they really want to get back at Trump and so on. They would never do something like that. I would, if anything like that happened, I think it would come probably rather from Netanyahu than from the Iranians. But it's anyway, it's a
Remember
game.
when George W. Bush said that they hate us for our freedom and democracy?
Yes, what democracy? Yes, democracy they impose on other people. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And I have had discussions with the people you probably know, and I won't mention them here, uh, which really stum me to the bottom of my heart because I've very high appreciation for this person who is actually defending the aggression of Netanyahu and Trump against Iran, saying the Iranian they have no right, they have no an understanding of human rights. People go into the street like at the beginning of January, and then the guards come out and mow them down, 40,000 of them and stuff like that. I don't even know how to respond if this person doesn't know that Iran has been infiltrated for the last decades, probably by not only the CIA but by all these, by the triad, as I call them. The CIA, Mossad, and MI6. Together to create this division and to create the protests and obviously the Iranian defense forces and police have to defend their country, as Israel would do, as the United States would do too. So this is unbelievable for me that somebody could even not even enter into the dialogue and understanding this. But this is what's going on, and this has been indoctrinated, I guess, by the media, by those in power, by those who you never see the faces, never hear the names of that are behind all these wars. It's indeed it's a financial war, and I'm coming back more and more to what we talked last time about. They're all behind this is the City of London, the rescue of the US dollar, and the rescue in that sense of control, which is being lost, of control of the Western monetary system, of the Western economy, so to speak.
We'll get to Iran in a minute. When I look at the events, like last Saturday's event, I think it was Saturday in any case, I look at it from a conceptual point of view. In other words, an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, whether successful, whether it failed, or ambiguous in its execution, it doesn't matter. It never is just an isolated act of violence. It's a signal event. And signal events in periods of systemic transition function less as anomalies and more as revelations. Not revelations of fact, that's the surface layer, that's what we can see, revelations of structure. Because the real question is not who pulled the trigger, it doesn't really matter. Okay, the real question is who paid for the bullet. What kind of a system produces a moment where such a trigger becomes possible, thinkable, or even useful? And I think what we're seeing right now, Peter, is the return of political violence inside the core. In other words, for decades, the Western system, particularly the United States, operated under a silent assumption that international political violence, stays over there, and we're the ones doing it, and we're the ones taking advantage and killing their leaders because it helps us promote our system or whatever that system is. But that internal political violence, at the highest level, has been structurally eliminated, and that assumption is now gone. Because what we're witnessing is not simply the reappearance of violence, but the collapse of the post-Cold War immunity illusion. In other words, the idea that the core of the system is stable, protected, untouchable, that layer has fractured. And so in historical terms, this matters enormously, because when political violence returns to the center, it signals several things. One, that elite consensus has weakened. Two, that institutional trust has eroded, that the system is no longer capable of fully containing its internal contradictions. And this isn't so much about Trump as an individual, It's about the system losing its monopoly on controlled conflict. Do you see that happening in the United States?
Absolutely. And I see it also happening more and more in Europe. It maybe not as blatantly as as it has been during the Trump period now, and it could happen to others. But you're absolutely right. This is something which brings back not only this sort of violence, which was all, let's face it, let's just put the name on it. It's all been planned in advance. These things that do not happen by coincidence. This is planned. This is MK Ultra and DARPA and the CIA machine that are behind these trained people who do whatever they need to do at the moment they get the signal to do it, and whether this has happened or not is actually immaterial. The fact that the media write about it and the people fall for it and the people get afraid and are kept on their toes of what's next. What's next? We have to do something. What's next? What can we expect? And the fear itself leads to the next step, the next step of oppression, and this is what we are confronted with. So I think what we really have to do is thinking of a different way of life, not to react anymore to stuff like that, and let the media write whatever they want to write about it. Let it go. Or if you are strong enough to read and laugh about it and take it in and not let it get into your emotions, that's fine. But that's exactly what they want. They want to control our emotions. They want to control not only individual emotions, but the mass emotions and society, and in the end, the economy, the world economy, which is gradually they're losing control over it. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, when I look at Trump, I don't see him as a politician. I see him as a systemic disruptor. In other words, just as you said, if we get rid of all the noise, we need to understand what Trump represents structurally. Trump, again, is not simply a political actor. He's not the president of the United States. Okay, he's a face of a project. He's
That's
a
definitely.
node of disruption inside the Western order because he embodies fragmentation of elite consensus, breakdown of traditional party structures, and the emergence of parallel narratives outside institutional control. So, in this sense, Donald Trump is less a person and more a carrier signal, okay, for a far deeper shift. In other words, the transition from a unified globalist architecture to a fragmented, contested system of power. And in periods like we're living through right now, individuals who concentrate disruption tend to become focal points of systemic pressure. And we're seeing it in Russia, for example. Putin spends a lot of time, in protected bunkers. As a matter of fact, Xi Jinping is doing pretty much the same. Donald Trump, Western leaders, because again, history is very consistent on this point. Because what we're seeing is, on one hand, we have the theater of power versus the architecture of power. Okay, and because again, after what happened, I went back, kind of looked at some of the images and stuff. Okay, and I don't care whether they, it was a staged event, because as Gallagher said, Galloway said, he said that they moved J.D. Vance first instead of the president of the United States, and these are the protocols. It doesn't really matter, because what happens immediately after such an event, the system activates its visible layer: media, commentary, narrative management, etc., etc. And this is what we call the theater of power. And so in this theater, the story becomes individual: a lone actor, a failure, an accident. A timeline becomes compressed: what happened, how, who. And the meaning becomes neutralized. In other words, it's an isolated incident and with no structural implication. But beneath that lies the architecture of power. Okay, and the architecture asks very different questions. Why now? Why this target? Why in this phase of systemic transition? Because in complex systems, timing is never random. Events cluster around inflection points. And so I look at three possible structural readings and see if you agree with some of them. Okay, again, if you're looking at the different spaces, the first structural interpretation is the systemic leak. In other words, the system is fragmenting to the point where control over violence is no longer absolute. And so in this reading, institutions weaken, security gaps appear, individuals or small networks act within those gaps. This isn't a conspiracy, it's entropy. Number two is the instrumental shock. And so the event functions as a kind of a shock mechanism, intentionally or opportunistically used to reshape the field. And so shock events historically, they consolidate support, they justify new security layers, they accelerate political polarization. And so in this reading, the question is not whether it was planned, but whether it becomes useful to multiple actors simultaneously, because in power systems, usefulness often matters more than origin. And number three, the signal of internal war. Because I think at a deeper layer, such event may indicate that the system has entered a phase of intra-elite conflict. Not open warfare, but not consensus either. A kind of a silent war. In a silent war, pressure is applied asymmetrically. You have legal pressure, you have informational pressure, you have financial pressure, you have occasionally physical pressure. And so history shows that when systems transition, internal competition intensifies before new equilibrium emerges. Do you see any of these actions? Because again, or you just say, look, Trump's rating is low, he needed to push it up, he needed to get rid of all the stuff coming out of Epstein, he needed to change the dynamics of the Iran war, and so they used the patsy, which actually, the guy was on the wrong floor, from what I understand. How do you see that?
No, yeah, I don't necessarily think it was to boost to boost Trump's rating. No, when I said it's all planned, it's planned in the sense of creating shocks, and these shocks, they deviate the attention of the people from what's going on behind, so they can do much easier the long-term plan of further control of an eternal war, for example, or more eternal wars, because it has been very clear, as was said, every war is a banker's war. And I go further and say every war that has been taking place in the last 100 to 200 years is a City of London war, because they control the Western monetary system, and they control through the Western monetary system pretty much most of the world economy. And with the dollar drifting away, I'm coming back to this, they're going to lose out. So these shock events, they serve to detract, among other things, to detract the people's attention from what is really going on. And that's certainly that's what's happening, because then the media, which is also part of the system, the media being owned by 5 huge media corporations, repeat everything the same. They have a mainstream, they have a mainstream narrative. And even if you, which I do very often, if you go to artificial intelligence, to many different sources, especially Western artificial intelligence, you cannot go beyond a certain point of the narrative, because they defend the narrative. So, it's all in the control of those who are in power behind it, and want to make sure that the people do not wake up. I think this is one of the key elements that I see in those events. And in that sense, I meant they are planned. They are planned as shock events. It doesn't have to be Trump. It could be another accident. A huge provoked accident. Last years, it was very common that cars were running into crowds and killing many people.
Yeah.
So that attracted a lot of attention, and deviated people's minds of why did that happen, who did it, and why did it. And you see, this is the sort of thing, I think the best description you just gave, it's a shock event that always has to be produced, so that the system over the control, the control over the system can continue. And in that sense, I believe, we're going towards an eternal war, which we have had, with several different intensities. The war is going on, has been going on. There's never been a stop between the First World War, really, and the Second World War, and then the Cold War, and now the current war. There are different types of wars, but they are always been going on, creating crisis, economic crisis, so that every time such a crisis happens, the surplus value that has been created by labor, with the actual work, can be shifted upwards to the elite. That's why the elite gets always richer and the poor gets poorer. That's the idea behind that, and the less economic power, because we are dependent on this dollar economy. The less power people have, the poorer they are, the less they can think about anything else than feeding themselves and surviving. So, there are several elements that feed into the same final goal of total control of the Western economy, of the world economy, so to speak.
I think what happened, or appeared to have happened, is not just an attack on a political figure. I think it's an attack on an assumption. The assumption that the system is stable, the assumption that the system is in control, the assumption that its internal conflicts are fully managed. And that illusion is now cracked. And once
Yeah,
the illusion breaks, this is,
absolutely. I agree with you. I agree with you. It's an illusion. And the bigger the illusion, the more these shock events need to happen.
yeah, so the assassination attempt on Trump is not just a security failure, as they're calling it in the media, not merely a political event. It's a structural signal emerging from a system under stress. And again, whether it was the result of failure, exploitation, deeper conflict, whether it was a lone wolf or somebody, MK Ultra, is irrelevant. It's secondary, because the real message is this: when power systems begin to fracture, they stop producing stability and start producing events. And I think this is a much a better reading of the events than focusing on this guy, whatever his name is. And I saw a lot of stuff out there that supposedly in Israel, thousands of people were searching the guy's name before the event, and somebody posted his name like 3 years ago. It doesn't really matter. Okay, because we're looking at it, from the point of view of what happened, but from a much higher conceptual point of view. Now, another thing I wanted to talk to you about is something I've been thinking of the last few days is what happened in Iran just before the beginning of the armed conflict on February 28th. So the question is like, why didn't Iran collapse under pressure? I mean, like, I think we're all expecting the color revolution. We all saw what was going on. You mentioned numbers earlier, 40,000 alleged, according to the State Department, killed. I think it was like 400 billion, but in any case, whatever the numbers, it doesn't matter. Okay, you just make it up. Okay,
Exactly.
what happened
It's
is but the thing is that we all expect it because we've seen this before, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, the souvenir, the fridge magnet, et cetera, et cetera. We know how this works. We've seen this in Libya, we've seen this in Syria, we've seen this all over the world. In the Soviet republics, we saw it in Ukraine with Maidan in 2014. So I think for the most part, most people, we're all hoping, at least, the sane-minded people, we're all hoping that Iran would be different, okay? And there were reasons to think that they would be different. But then again, we all thought that the Soviet Union would last forever, and it collapsed without firing a bullet, literally overnight. I went to bed in one country and I woke up in another country, like literally. You know what I mean? And so the question is, why do you think Iran didn't collapse under all that pressure and all the mechanisms under the control of color revolutions that the West has perfected over the past 40, 50 years? Because again, the first color revolution, we can go back to Ferdinand Marcos in 1986, or we can go to Tiananmen in 1989. These were like the first examples of color revolutions. So this has been around for 40 years, so they're pretty good at it. But Iran didn't fall. Why do you think that happened?
Yes, actually, the question I've asked myself too. I came to the conclusion that Iran didn't collapse because those who pulled the strings very, very high up, they didn't want Iran to collapse because they needed the war to continue. The war is money. The war is not only money. The war is also a psychological drug. It's something that keeps people busy thinking and talking about and so on. So Iran didn't collapse because they were supposed not to be collapsed. Well, you could ask the same question. Why did Putin not take over in the first week Ukraine? He could have. With all the power of the military power, with all the weaponry he has, he could have invaded and stopped the war immediately. Why didn't he do that? He could have saved millions of people's lives, but he didn't. Why not? And I think the same forces are behind both of these events and maybe others to come and others in the past, so that we continue having wars and can play with well, in the case of Trump's on and off button of war and not war. The stock exchange and the gains on on dropping oil prices and on rising oil prices is just tremendous. That all of these things can continue and keep us busy. This is part of the plan, what I call the larger plan, and that's why Iran hasn't collapsed. And you could also say, why didn't Iran? Iran has a very strong missile system, which is being helped and assisted by China. Why didn't they destroy Israel? They could have. I mean, it is relatively easy. They could have done that. They have enough missiles to do that. They haven't done it. So there is something very much stronger behind that calls the shots on how long and how fast the war should be finished or go on. This is my take, and this is a conclusion I've come to already quite a while ago. So I think in another occasion and another context we talked about that too. That finally everything is under one big roof, which is conceptually uh, uh, a globalist roof maintained by a few pillars, and these few pillars, they have to act according to those who call the shots. And the pillars are, the big powers, and probably Iran is one of those pillars. And I call them pillars instead of polar
Yeah,
system.
it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I have uh, I have a different version. Again, here is there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's you and I we're just debating and analyzing things. I think one of the reasons why color revolution it didn't work is that color revolutions require time to mobilize, time to build narrative, to fracture the elite. And in Iran, the system is built to collapse that time window instantly. And so the moment protests emerged, they were neutralized before they could scale. So the failure of a color revolution in Iran is not accidental; it's structural. But okay, there's another, I think, more important thing, and that's the role of faith and martyrdom. In other words, Western analytical framework often underestimates the role of belief systems that are not purely material and that are not purely Western. And so in the Iranian case, Shia Islam introduces a critical point, the valorization of martyrdom. In other words, the figure of the supreme leader, currently Ali Khamenei, who was martyred and killed by the Americans, is not just a political authority, but part of a theological structure. And so the idea that dying for the faith represents the highest forms of righteousness creates a system that is not easily destabilized through pressure or fear. This is not the West. And so this changes everything. Because a system that is willing to endure suffering, even death, okay, which is the highest act of suffering, at scale is fundamentally different from one that prioritizes material well-being above all, which is why the West and the East are two different worlds. Because so it becomes resilient in ways that are difficult to model using standard political science tools for the West or artificial intelligence. But there is a deeper miscalculation, I feel, okay, when we compare power on the one hand and the idea on the other. And I think that's a broader, more profound argument. In other words, that ideas cannot be destroyed by force. And this is where the analysis becomes civilizational rather than geopolitical. In other words, take the case of Israel, for example, and the ideology often associated with it, Zionism. Whether you support it or ignore it or oppose it, it's irrelevant for the structural point. It's not merely a state, but a project, a vision of order, identity, and future. And the same applies to political Islam in its various forms. You cannot bomb an idea out of existence. And history has demonstrated that repeatedly. In other words, revolutionary ideologies survive repression, religious systems outlive empires, political doctrines mutate rather than disappear. Even the massive machinery of states like the Soviet Union failed to eradicate completely these different belief systems entirely. Okay, now why didn't Iran surrender? If you put it all together, Iran does not refuse to surrender simply because of political stubbornness. It's because it is anchored in this dual civilizational identity. It operates through a hardened ideological state apparatus. It draws strength from theology that legitimizes sacrifice. And it exists within a framework where ideas, not just institutions, define survival. And so external strategies that assume Iran will behave like a Western political system responsive to pressure, to protest, to economic hardships, they absolutely misread the nature of the system. Okay, so I think, as far as I'm concerned, again, this is my point, my opinion. We're talking about the war of ideas. Okay, that the idea can only be defeated by another idea. This is not rhetorical; it's operational. So if Zionism is a project, if political Islam is a project, if liberal globalism is a project, then the real battlefield is not military, it's ideational. Okay, missiles can destroy infrastructure, yes. They can kill people, yes. They cannot replace meaning. And without a competing idea, coherent, attractive, structurally viable, no amount of pressure will produce lasting transformation. And so I think what we're witnessing is not a failure of tactics, but a failure of understanding. Iran is not simply a state under pressure. It's a civilizational system under tension, defended by ideology, reinforced by faith, misunderstood by frameworks that assume that all societies operate under the same logic. And until that misunderstanding is corrected, and I don't think it will be, because the age of Rockefellers and Henry Kissinger's, Zbigniew Brzezinski's, that is, gone. The people who call themselves diplomats today, they're nincompoops. They do not understand, how these realities collide. And so they try to understand everything against the backdrop of Western ideology, which has nothing to do with Iran and other Eastern forces or philosophies. Do you see any of this as the reason why Iran was able to withstand and is able to withstand pressure from the United States and Israel?
Yes, of course. Let me just add to what I said before, and in the line of what you're saying. I think Iran has a long, long history of Islamic ideology, and a history of civilization that passes long way over our Western civilization
Six
that we
thousand years. I mean,
Exactly. It's thousands of years. And I think you cannot just eradicate that. And that's where I said, when I said at the beginning, eventually it becomes a winning, a winning idea of a spiritual win rather than an ideological or a physical win. So whoever pulls the strings can pull them only to a certain point, and then something else takes over. And in the case of Iran, that certainly may have contributed or may contribute to Iran's resistance. And in the meantime, I've given many interviews to Press TV, and they told me so many times, we will not give up. We will stand stark and up to our principles to the last, very last moment. And I believe them. I believe them because their history is something which gives them strength. And I mean strength, not just physical power, but spiritual strength. And I think that's eventually what we have to count on. And that's a level. The spiritual level is a level that these powers that are now that they're trying to be in control of the world, they do not have that spiritual power. They will never be vibrating on that dimension that these long histories, and I think people can reach that too by going into themselves rather than always outside themselves. They cannot. They simply cannot, with their want for power, reach these levels of spiritual power. And that's where I think they will eventually, succumb to how long it will take, I don't know, but eventually it will happen.
Peter, as the last topic for today, before the show, you and I were talking about alternative systems. In other words, we have this system which obviously is on its deathbed. Okay, but how do you imagine? Because again, you come from the World Bank, you've been doing this for many, many years. You understand conceptually how systems work. So how do you see what system could replace this defected, failed, system that we have right now? And what examples could you give us globally from all this, myriad of places you've worked in countries and stuff that we could use as examples, whether it's Southeast Asia, the Middle East, it doesn't matter where, Latin America, so that people can actually understand that there are alternatives, and an American system is not necessarily has to be one of them.
Yes, I mean, already while I was with the World Bank, I soon started to realize that this economic indicator, socio-economic indicator that we are using, and that the world is still largely using today, is the GNP, the gross national product, which is purely based on material production, material consumption, on material use and transfer, and so on. All of that has actually very little to do with the people's well-being. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether whether a country has the highest GDP, or an Andean country, or an Andean society, or an African society in which I worked a lot, which is the rural areas are 70% or more. The demonetized. They don't work with the monetary system, and yet their level of happiness may be much larger than ours. So I've always doubted this indication of happiness. And indeed, there are some countries I know of two particularly that have proceeded already quite a while ago to a new sort of accounting for people's well-being. One of them is Bhutan, a very small country, a Buddhist country, in between where is it? Between India and Pakistan. I think it's a very tiny, small Buddhist country, mountainous and so on. They have developed the National Happiness Index, and they follow this National Happiness Index very, very closely, by measuring well-being of the people, not only in terms of the level of education they got, the level of spending they can do, how well they eat, not just how much they eat, but how well they eat, how the environment is protected. For example, in Bhutan, 72% is a minimum that they have to maintain forest areas, which contributes to the environment, and so on. They have a number of indicators, maybe 90 different indicators that require constant inquiries and judgments by the people themselves. They're being asked, are you happy? And why are you happy? Why are you not happy? And so on. So all of this comes together, and the government then tries to modify their systems according to what comes out. And these are happiness indicators for me. Obviously, Bhutan is a very Buddhist country, so it has a philosophy which fits very well into such a system. Now, and this is for me something that maybe the world should think about more seriously, rather than GNP, talking about GNH, which means gross national happiness. But there are others, and one of them that I also know a little bit about is Vanuatu. It's different. It has similarities to the Bhutan system. It is also one that is based on people's their own assessment, very often their own assessment, how well they think they're being educated, how well their health system is, how well their health is, and how they feel on a daily basis. Are they happy? And if they're not happy, why are they not happy? So these systems, which require a constant follow-up, a constant inquiry, I think they give you a much better indication of what happiness may be. And it has very little to do with earning money or with owning money. Owning capital goods is actually more destructive for such societies than what they can do with what they have. I think if we would drift, I'm pretty sure the Western society who listens to what I'm saying, they think he is crazy. Maybe, that's fine. But just think about it. Just think about the different type of indicators which these people have, and they're living much happier than we do. They have a different kind of life. They are not based on consumption as we. Our lives is based on consumption. Some of them more than others, but it's basically a life that thrives on growth and constant growth. And now we know our Earth is limited. We cannot grow beyond certain limits. And so this is something which eventually will collapse the system, and we have to find out another way of living. And I think these are very good alternatives. I'm pretty sure there are others, and maybe there are others that are not covering entire countries. Or in the case of Vanuatu, it's an island in the South Pacific, which is pretty much isolated, and they can do whatever they want with their system. Bhutan is also pretty much isolated. It's a mountainous country and Buddhist country, and they also can do pretty much what they have decided to do. But I'm pretty sure there are areas in South America, not entire countries, but probably areas of countries like when I, for example, when I worked in Bolivia for a long time, I could see the difference between certain areas of Bolivia and other areas of Bolivia, and how the people who live at 4,000 meters elevation have a different system of considering themselves happy and content. They don't run after money. They don't run after consumption, not because they have themselves invented a different system, but it has been incorporated in their culture, in their way of life. That there is something different than just earning money. And most of them also, they don't necessarily live on cash. That it's not a cash economy, it's an exchange economy. And so they have different ways of looking at happiness. And if we think because their per capita GNP is so low that we consider them poor, the World Bank considers them poor, anything that is below $2 a day. It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts to think about that, and uniform that around the world. It has to me been an aberration from the very beginning, and I fought against it as much as I could. And I see that other countries have been succeeded in finding other indicators to happiness, or to, let's not call it necessarily happiness, but to general well-being,
I've
individual well-being, general well-being.
I've read not too much. I'm not very familiar with the Bhutan model, but I'm somewhat familiar. You mentioned the happiness index. For example, they put primacy on, for example, psychological stability. In other words, a lower level of alienation compared to hyper-industrial societies. Environmental resilience. In other words, long-term sustainability prioritized over short-term gain, something which is the anathema in the West. Social cohesion, as you mentioned it before, less fragmentation, stronger shared identity. And you could say the same about the Koya Indians. You mentioned Bolivia earlier. The Koyas are the same way, less fragmentation, stronger shared identity. And then strategic autonomy, which is, by limiting exposure, again, Bhutan, by nature of its geography, avoids many systemic shocks. Okay, but also there's a question is, can a model, because Bhutan is a small country, less than 1 million people, I think it's like 800,000 people. Okay, can this model be applied to large complex states? Whether, I'm not even talking about the United States or China, but any society, any Western society, I don't know. Okay, what do you think?
It's a very good question, and it's a question which I asked myself too. And then I came back to what I discovered in the highlands of the Andes, for example, in Bolivia. But the same could be applying in Peru, because there's really the frontier between Bolivia and Peru is purely artificial. They're similar cultures and they live on similar values, so that could be applied too. And if we would apply this rule in a rural area of, for example, the United States, or in a European country, uh, that they would just step out of the system, and maybe a few communities work together, and have different types of indicators, different types of exchanges or monetary system, whatever you want to call, dealing and trading with each other. It could happen, and it has actually happened. And I've actually witnessed this in Greece and in Spain during the 2008, 2010 so-called crisis, which also was an artificially imposed crisis. There are villages in the northwestern part of Spain, also in several parts of Greece, that have made themselves independent of the system and have worked together. Of course, they couldn't be totally independent, but to the extent they could, and they were much, much better off than others. Unfortunately, once Greece succumbed to the Western pressure and is now full of debt that they never get out of if they stay in the euro, they integrated again into the system. But it's possible. I think it's possible. You could not necessarily start with the country like the United States or China. And I think, by the way, China is in many ways goes in that direction already. not entirely. They have their own system, but it goes very much in a direction where capital wealth for most of the people is not necessarily what makes them happy. It's more the social services that they have at disposal that they can count on, and the social coherence that exists through this system that makes them feel better. So there is some indications of that probably such a system could work much rather in Asia, in the East, rather than in the contaminated West, except for the West, which has already been pretty much separated from the rest of the civilization, like the high Andes or also the Amazon area. Take the Amazon area. I mean, they're totally, to some extent, totally separated from the rest of the world in Brazil as well as in Peru. And I could very easily imagine that they could create such a system. So it's not totally out of this world. It's not something that happens overnight. Our system hasn't become so corrupt overnight either. It has taken hundreds of years, thousands of years, at least 2000. Let's start with 2000 to bring it to the level where we are today. So I don't think it needs 2000 years to create a different well-being system where everybody can benefit from. And I think the more people benefit from it, the faster it will progress towards a more generalized system in a country.
So based on what you're saying, I think that Bhutan uh, is not just an alternative government, it's an alternative answer to the question, what is a society for? And in a world where most systems are converging towards a technocratic control, algorithmic governance, financial abstraction, I think Bhutan represents something almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Anachronistic, a state that still attempts to
Yes.
align governance with human experience rather than system optimization.
Yes, anachronistic in our sense, in our Western sense. Yeah, I agree.
Of course, it has to be. That's the language we have. Okay, we don't
Yeah,
have the language of Bhutan to explain the
exactly.
and this.
I think that's
And I
a
think the
very
real
good point.
takeaway is not that Bhutan is a universal model. Obviously, it isn't. The real insight is this: that every system is built on an implicit metric of success. The West, what's the West's metric of success? Growth, markets, power. Keep up with the Joneses. China, stability, control, civilizational continuity. Emerging technocratic systems, data prediction, optimization, AI, etc. Bhutan, balance, meaning, sustainability. And so the future will not produce one dominant system. I think it will produce competing models of reality itself. And I think that's one of the things, you and I have been talking about this quite a bit about this, okay? For the first time in history, we have no language to explain what the world is going to look like around the bend. And by language, I don't mean English or Russian or Chinese or Farsi or Japanese. It's the language of philosophy, language that will allow us to explain metaphysically, okay, what this world we're coming into is going to look like. And I think that's what everybody is searching for, okay?
You made just a terrific point, Daniel, the language. Very often I want to describe something which I experience or see, and I realize that in our Western languages, whether it's English or Italian or Spanish or whatever, we don't have the words and the expressions to describe a situation that I see or perceive. There's no words for it. And you just said it, anachronistic is a term that applies to our Western world. It wouldn't apply, for example, the same term in Bhutan or Vanuatu.
China or Vietnam or Japan. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So this is absolutely great. We have created a language which conforms to our value system, to our Western consumption system, and has not necessarily anything to do with world values.
So, Peter, we're out of time, but it was great, and I'm looking forward to our next week's conversation. I have no idea what this week is going to bring us. I'm sure a hell of a lot of fun. So let's do this again next week, same time, same place. Thanks so much for joining us, and again, folks, subscribers, fans, watchers, join us again and spread the word and hit the link and make sure as many people watch this as possible. Thanks so much again, and take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Bye.
Daniel.
Bye.
Great to be with you. Bye bye.